Yeah,
All right, so I'm going to start in three, two, one. All right, welcome back to the Melton Forge Works video podcast edition. This week I have my friend Rob Hough in what part of Indiana are you in again?
I guess it would be considered northeastern,
In
kind of.
northeastern Indiana. All right, good deal. Man, there's so many of you guys in Indiana, and it's such a haul for me. It's a bummer when y'all do stuff up there. I'm always jealous that there's so much going on up there that I can't uh, come be a part of
Yeah,
more often. But anyway, this is Rob. Rob and I met at a tire hammer class at John Perriloux's shop in Robert, Louisiana, and I think my
what was
first
that,
memory
four,
of
four
Rob
years ago?
was. God, yeah, has it been 4 years?
I think so.
Man, time flies. I'm really bad with estimating time. I say things to my wife and kids all the time, like a few months ago when we did this or that, and it'll be like 4 years. And they're like, "Dad,
Yeah,
that was four
yep.
years ago." I'm terrible with
I
estimating past time.
I
Um,
think that goes with age.
yeah, my first memory of you was this guy walking around with a big stogie and a huge beard and everybody, a lot of the other people seemed to know you, and I was like, "Who is this guy? I don't know who this guy is." But that was the first time we met, and man, that was such a great experience. Those tire hammer classes for me were just as much about just hanging out with other like-minded
Yep.
smiths and craftsmen as it was about getting a power hammer. Of course, I was really excited in that first class to take home my first, I think at that time it would have been my second tire hammer technically, but I was super excited. But man, I had no idea how much fun I was going to have that weekend. And then I wound up coming back three more times, and you came back
I've been
at
there
least.
3 times, I think.
Okay, I
Yeah,
was about to say you were there at
3 or 4.
least two more times. Yeah.
Yeah, three
Um,
or four.
yeah, so that was how we met, and then we've kind of hung out and seen each other at various events at the coal iron play demos and at Quad State. And I've kind of you guys the Brazil nuts allow me to hang around whenever y'all put up camp. And so I appreciate you tolerating me hanging around you guys. I got to thinking today before we talked. I was like, I don't think Rob and I have ever forged together.
Nope.
I think we've just been around each other at all these events. And
Yeah.
of course, that's kind of my thing. Whenever I go to a demo or some big meeting, I'm usually not into going there to do a lot of work. But you guys, when you set up camp, it's like that's what you guys do, the whole time, it seems.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well,
That's
you and
that was kind of
Paul and
Brian. That's Brian's ethos, really. That's where that came from. Was Brian Brazil?
yeah.
The first time I went there with him, I mean, he he is a taskmaster. He will keep you working.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, if you want to get away, you got to wait until he walks away from the forge and then just run, because otherwise he will keep you working.
Yeah, at all these events, I've showed up and just pulled up a chair and just watched you guys work, like for like the whole weekend. And I mean, it's not really work. I call it work. It's really having a good time. Um,
Oh
but
yeah.
so in that train of thought, how I know you are obviously Brazil trained and influenced heavily in how you do your work. What was your first experience with forging of any kind?
My first real experience was, um, oh, what was it? I mean, just YouTube, I think. Yeah, it was YouTube. Um, I've always had the bug to forge. Like I've always wanted to do it. I just never really thought it was approachable. So I
Hmm.
never really I never really dug into it. It was one of those things. It just seemed like you had to have this giant, massive blacksmith shop to be able to do things. And then I came just cruising through YouTube once. I came across this guy. I still remember his name, Chandler Dixon.
Oh, I remember
And
that
I,
guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I remember watching a couple of his videos and I was like, this dude has no idea what he's doing. And I don't mean this to be like derogatory, but
No,
I
he's
remember
great.
thinking, yeah, I remember thinking, and if this dude can do it, I have no excuse. So I started, like figuring out what I was going to need. And then I bought a forge on eBay, I think, like the Hell's Forge on eBay. It's a two burner propane
Hmm.
forge. I bought a Kanka anvil from Centaur Forge and a couple of really crappy hammers that I can't remember the last time I've used them. Um, and then I discovered the Essential Craftsman, and he had an online blacksmith class. So I went through that, and
Okay. Yeah.
I did 90% of it, I think, and then um, I had found some other videos, Alex Steele and stuff like that. So I had heard the name Brian Brazil, but I didn't know anything about the guy. I didn't know,
Yeah.
I knew Alex Steele talked about him a lot. So a hammer forging class had come up in Goshen, Ohio, at the Goshen School of Blacksmithing is what it's called now. And I thought, well, maybe I'll check that out. And it was only 2 hours from where I lived, so I was like, I would be a fool not to at least go check it out. So I drove over there and took that class. Actually before that I met him at Quad State. I got invited to Quad State. Ed Soul, I was like his plus one. He invited me to come out with him. So I did that, and then I met Brian and Ed at Quad State briefly, and then took the class. And it's kind of funny. I started in 2019, I think, the very very beginning of 2019. But I don't really consider myself. I don't consider it my anniversary. I consider that hammer class my anniversary because
Yeah.
but prior to that, I was forging on the horn. I was standing at traditional, like in front of my anvil,
You
um,
didn't know what you
things
didn't
like
know.
that. Right. And then I walked up to Goshen and I was watching Brian forge a pair of hammer tongs, I believe. A little fuzzy on exactly, but they were tongs, and he was drawing the reins out on those tongs, and it was, I want to say 5/8 inch material, and I watched him break those down like that, and I was like, man, I don't know what I just saw, but that was amazing because I know I
Yeah.
can't do it.
Yeah. Made it look
So
super easy.
yeah, I mean, and he does, but I decided right then and there, I was like, I don't know what this guy's teaching, but I want to learn it.
Yeah.
I want to know how to do that. So I took that class. I was way out of my league. He had us forging tools prior to the class, and I think I botched most every one of them I made, except for I think the set hammer was the only one I didn't screw up. That's probably the easiest tool to make.
I was about to say, it's a
Um,
square block. So there you go.
yeah, yeah. So I took that class, and then I took some other classes with Roy Adams, Christ-centered Iron Works. I took some classes with him, and
Sure.
those were always really fun. And Roy is a really good teacher. I will say I don't mean to. Anybody that knows Brian knows Brian can be a handful, and if you're not thick-skinned, he's probably not the best teacher for you. I will say that much.
Yeah.
If you don't have the thick
Yeah.
skin or you're not
He's
used to that
very,
Southwestern,
he's very, very
yeah,
direct.
yeah. And he says things in a weird way sometimes, and it's kind of confusing for people if you don't understand his lingo. And I've always
Yeah.
joked with Ed that Ed is kind of like his anger translator. There used to be a Jay and Peel skit where Obama had an anger translator and it was one of those guys, and he would translate everything back mad. Um, so Ed was kind of the reverse of that for Brian. He's just like a translator. So because Brian would say something, I have to go ask him, and like I don't know what he means, and Ed would break it down
Yeah.
into something a little bit more digestible.
That's
So,
great. I'm laughing
but
because I've
yeah,
I've been around it just enough to know exactly what you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was fun, but yeah, I was not, I was not prepared for that class. But luckily, they took pity on me. I remember striking when we were actually making the hammers. I remember striking, and I wore myself out on the first
How
Saturday.
many
Just
blisters?
I don't know if I got any blisters, but maybe one. But I mean, my arms were and my shoulders were just destroyed. And then the next
Yeah.
day, Ed came over. I think Ed took pity on me, came over and gave me some pointers. And believe it or not, I followed everything he said. and I wasn't powerful, but I was accurate, and I was able to do it all day long
Yeah,
without
nice.
any issues.
Yeah.
Um, so, and then, this is with anything else. As you do it, you gain confidence, you start hitting harder, your accuracy
Hmm.
improves. And then they throw curveballs at you like, oh, well, now you need to match the angle of the tool that we're hitting here. And I'm like, wait, what? So then they present things at these crazy angles. And yeah, so I'm still not great at that, but I'm better than most, but not as good as some.
Hmm.
I'll say that much. But yeah, I was really fortunate to meet those guys, and they really created a relationship with the Goshen folks, Jamie Geyer.
Hmm.
And when COVID hit, they sequestered themselves in Goshen, Ohio. So I made it a point to go out there like every weekend. I'd
Okay.
leave
Yeah, I
on
remember
Thursday.
that. I remember they
Yep,
were up there and I think they took one or two tire hammers up there.
we did
Is that,
eventually. Yeah, I was the one that
yeah.
brought those back.
Yeah.
So I brought one
Okay.
of mine back, and then I brought Brian's back. And was really funny though is they were there. I want to say 4 to 6, 4 to 6 months, somewhere in there.
Huh.
So every Thursday through Sunday, I would drive out there and stay at Jamie's and just be their forge gopher
Hmm.
and do whatever. I didn't ask for lessons or anything. I just kind of
Oh
observed
man,
and did
but just
whatever
I
they needed.
imagine you picked up all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, and then to his credit and the nature of Brian, if he sees you doing something really inefficiently, he'll come talk to you and say, "Hey, well, why don't you do this or why
Sure.
don't you do that?" So I would get tidbits from there, but I never took lessons. And then when they went home, I think it was the same year, for my birthday, I decided I'd take lessons from Brian. He was offering classes at his place, so I
Okay.
took a 4 or 5 day class with those guys. I went out there, and people asked me what it was like, and I was like, "Man, it was like living through an episode of Grumpy Old Men." Um, it was great, but man, the bickering between those two was epic.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of fun and we got a lot of work done. And it was really funny because Brian had this assumption that I had been forging longer than I had been. He thought I'd been at it 4 or 5 years at that point. And I was like, oh no. He's like, man, because this didn't come out until like the third day I was there. And then he goes, well, had I known that, we would have done some things differently. So the next time I got with him a few months later, he came back out to Goshen and we went through some stuff. And
Hmm.
by that point, I was able to pick things up a lot quicker. And then
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. He came out for a 2 week stretch at one point, and I kind of became his handler. He was just by himself. He's a handful. He is a handful, and he's a taskmaster. He will, as soon as that forge is lit, he will keep you forging until, like, you
Oh
wouldn't think
yeah.
an older
Yeah.
guy like that could do it, but man, he will
Yeah.
forge
When he
all
gets the
day.
bit in his mouth, he's off to the races until he's
Yeah,
done. And that might
and
not be the
very,
time you think it's gonna be.
yeah, he's very exacting, very particular, and he wants, and I understand it, but he wants to forge all the things. Even if you could fabricate it, you could plasma cut that thing out and drill 3 holes in it and be done. He would rather
Yeah.
forge that ring and punch it. And I understand it to a degree, but at the same time, it's a little detrimental to getting work done. Like, if you've got 2 weeks to get something done, it's like, dude, we've only got so many hours in the day.
Yeah. He
Oh, it
understands
started
it though.
raining.
He gets it. You know, I had a discussion with him at I think it was one of the latter tire hammer classes that I went to where he was also there. And we shared a camping space there in the classroom building, you know, and we
Oh,
stayed
yeah.
up late one night sitting at the park at the me and him and Ed stayed up real late one night sitting outside talking. And, um, we got to talking about, the method that he was teaching and that everybody had, obviously has become uh, known as the Brazil method of teaching and all that. And I said something to the effect of, I took that class under Lyle Wynn, and I said, well, I took the method that I learned from you, and I basically just kind of incorporated it into kind of how I work, but I don't really follow your method for everything I do, and I said, I use welders and 3D printers you know, this was before I got an induction machine, I think. But anyway, I was saying, if there's any amount of technology I can get my hands on, I'm going to use it. Not really because I want to cheat so much, just because I have a lot of fun using all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. And he completely understood it. Maybe I caught him at a really good time, but he appreciated it and seemed to be okay with it. But I totally get why he wants to forge everything, uh, because he thinks in a way that I can't
yeah, yeah,
about forging material. Like he can look at a piece of material and intuitively figure out. I mean, I can kind of figure the steps out, A to B, like, kind of like the steps to make a sandwich. First you grab the bag, then you open the bag, then you get the bread out, all that kind of
yeah.
stuff. But it's like he thinks about it in a different way, and that's about the best way I can explain it. And so I think if I had that mindset, if I thought the way he did, I would want to forge everything, forge to finish too, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a lack of confidence in my forging ability.
I think some of it is also like representation, right? So he's on the go all the time when when he's on the road. He's so when people come by your station and look at stuff, they don't want to see a bunch of fabricated crap. They want to
Yeah.
see forged stuff. So from that standpoint, I get it. And this is kind of a running joke with Paul and I, but at the same time, there are some things that people just won't see, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like on my fire pots on my forges, there's things on there that's just not forged, and you won't see. And I was joking, I was like, somebody gets on their hands and knees and crawls under my forge and looks at it and says something. Well, they can go kick rocks, I mean, come on,
Yeah. That is one thing I
at this,
do appreciate when you guys all set up your workstations and you've got the TV trays that you've forged out. Like everything you're using down to the scribe is a
yeah,
forged tool, and you can tell, you can look at one of those workstations and see that everything there is forged. And it's kind of like your journey to get all those tools. It's not just, well, it's the whole need a tool, make a tool kind of idea,
yep,
and in that vein, and with the Brazil Nut Group, if it's need a tool, make a tool, it's going to be need a tool, forge a tool.
yeah.
Um, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, no,
Um,
and it's the same like with the fabricated stuff. Like I don't denigrate it because when I see it, because and this is kind of funny. We've joked about forging the actual forge tables instead of fabricating them because they're fabricated tables, right? It's just
oh yeah,
2-inch
yeah,
angle iron. But we've joked about forging those before. But at the same time, like the swing outs, that we use to support material while it's on the forge. Um, all the hardware for those is typically forged, but at the same time, if you don't have time, a piece of pipe will work, and there's
yeah,
nothing wrong with
right,
that. Sometimes I have things where I've put it on my forge and thought, well, I'll eventually get around to forging an actual piece for this and replace it. Like on my current forge, I've got an electric what are those things called, an automatic transformer. Like
yeah, yeah,
so you can increase and decrease the speed of your fan. I use one of those on
oh
my
yeah,
forge in the
yeah,
shop, and I just fabricated a little mount bracket for it that sits on the forge. It mounts to the forge, and I've looked at it a bunch of times, and it would be relatively simple to forge that. Just haven't gotten around to it,
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's one. I don't take it. That's not something I take out of the shop. When I leave the shop, I use a hand crank blower. But
yeah,
it's just one of those things where it's like, one of these days I'm going to forge that because people will come to my hammer ends and look around. And
yeah.
I think
That
that's
is
the thing with
something.
all blacksmiths, right? Like they'll go to your station and just start looking at your stuff. And I think that's
Hmm.
where some of that with Brian comes from. He's seen that, and it should be a representation of your work,
Yeah,
and your relationships too. I think there's some of that to be said as well. I have tools from a lot of different guys. I got Mark Lang, Andrew Larson, Jonathan Pinkston, Paul Kennedy's work. And they had
yeah.
some of those guys have some of my stuff.
My hammer rack is 99% other people's work. I think I have
Yeah,
like three of my hammers in my all three different racks in my shop, and the rest of them are all people. that I've gotten tools from. But yeah, I just put water in the shop the other day for the first time in 20 some odd years, and hooked up a sink. And I went to go. I was like, I washed my hands and I thought, man, I need a paper towel rack. And I thought, oh, I need to. This is an opportunity for me to actually forge something for my shop. And then I
Yep.
dug in a drawer and pulled out a pegboard hook and hung the paper towels on the pegboard hook. And so I don't know if I'll get around to doing that or not. But w- when I went to Clay Spencer's shop to take the tire hammer tools, that that is one of those places where there's all kinds of that work. Like in the bathroom in his shop, the guest bathroom in his shop, like the paper towel holder, has got like a really nice wizard's head focused on
Yeah.
it, but it's a guy holding his nose. It's a
Cool.
wizard head with a hand coming around, and it's just amazing, and that stuff is everywhere. And so I definitely want to do more of that kind of stuff in my shop, where if people come out, it's not like, what does this guy do? There's a welder here and an induction machine, but I don't see any forge work anywhere. There's hardly any real forge work in my shop other
Ah,
than hooks.
what's funny is I struggle with that. Like, I don't mind in the shop as much, but when it comes to forging items for the house, I just dread it because I will have to look at it all the time. And I know me enough to know I'll see something and it will bug me to no end. And man,
Yeah.
I just dread it.
Well, I think we all look at our work that we've done 2 years ago, and we cringe. No matter how good you were back then, 2 years on, if you've stayed consistent in it, you're going to look back at that piece and you're probably going to see something you don't like, or that you've improved on.
Oh yeah.
But most of the people that are going to come to your house, well, I don't know. You're a blacksmith and you got a lot of blacksmith friends. You might have a lot of people come to your house that would recognize good forge work. But for the most part, a lot of people, you know, people aren't going to come in their house and look at something and go, "Oh man, that's terrible." They're going to look at it and say, "Oh, that's hand forged. That's awesome." Um, I've got a few things in the house that I've forged, and knock on wood, that I'm still satisfied with most of them. There's a few things though I have thought, man, I need to remake that because I could do it a lot better now. And so there's that aspect to it. It's something that you can hang in your house, and then once you attain the skills to get better at it, just yank it down and put up a new one. But
Yeah,
um,
a few weeks ago, Paul Kennedy and Kurt Fehrenbach and myself, we went out. There's a place in Muncie, Indiana that has a Samuel Yellen gate. So we went over there to check it
huh?
out, and it's only like 15 minutes for me. So I can't believe it's taken me 2 years to get over there.
Oh
But we
wow.
went over there and checked it out, and one of the things the biggest thing I think I walked away from at looking at that piece up close and really examining it was just um, it's not as refined as you would think it would be.
Hmm.
You know, I was really surprised. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a beautiful piece, but
Yeah.
I think it's perspective. It's like to the average person, they wouldn't really know what they were looking at. I looked at
Right.
it and thought to myself, man, you know what? I'm actually not that bad at forge welding. You know, like some of the forge welds in that
Yeah.
piece that I saw, I was like, man, I can do better than that.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then there were some other things, that there was like these little flowers, super delicate little flowers on it, and at this point, they're almost 100 years old. I
Yeah.
think in 10 years, they'll be close to 100 years old. And it was like, they're still attached and they're
Right.
originals. And that's got to be a testament to his skill set, or at least his people's skill set, whoever
Hmm.
actually did the work. I believe everything had to pass his eye before it left the shop. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
he did all the work on it, but
Hmm.
he designed it. And again, perspective, like, even as a blacksmith, if you're 3 feet away from it and looking at it, you're not going to see those things. It's just going
Yeah.
to look like a beautiful piece. You get
Well,
up
and
and
it's
start
a
examining it.
it's a functional gate too. I
Right.
mean, and how long has
Yeah.
it been there?
Right.
I mean,
So
it's
that
still doing what
changed.
it's supposed to do, and it's
You know,
beautiful, but Yeah, that reminds me of something I saw the other day. You might have even seen it. There's this thing going around, and it's this lady, and she's holding up a Bowie knife, and
Yes.
um, it's the brother of James Bowie,
Yep.
I think, and it's one
Yep.
of the few knives that they found that they can directly tie back to the Bowie brothers, you know.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought of when I looked at that knife, I was like, that would never pass an ABS journeyman smith
Yep.
examination today. They would take one look at that knife and tell the person to take a hike, and not that's
Yeah.
not I'm not kicking rocks at the ABS, but the point I'm making is that was a functional, beautiful knife that basically started an entire area of craftsmanship, or an entire industry of craftsmanship around bladesmithing. I mean, because the ABS is basically built around Bowie knives,
Yeah.
around that style of knife. And you've got this Yellen gate that was beautiful and functional and has stood the test of time. But we look at it and go, you know, I know people now. I have friends that I could pick up the phone and call that could probably make a better gate than that.
Oh yeah.
But that's not to say anything bad about the Bowie or the history of the Bowie knife, or the quality of that knife or the quality of that gate. But just think about it. Those were people making knives and gates because they had to.
Yep.
you know they had to make a living. So Yellen was not in that probably just because he enjoyed standing around the forge all the time. That was his career. It's how he paid the bills, and he got to
Yep.
be extremely good at it. And he was trained by uh previous masters. But we who are in this craft today, most of us are not full-time all the time smiths and doing it because we have to.
Yeah.
And so we can take our time making
Yeah.
these things where who knows what the time frame it was that gate had to be produced in. It might have been
Yeah.
under a,
That's
a
the
time
thing.
frame, whereas if I was going to do a gate like that, I might take 2 or 3 months to do it, and it might turn out better than that. But
Yeah.
that's, again, not to say that the Yellen work is not incredibly inspirational and great. It's just, I think the point of all this is I'm saying I think we don't give ourselves as modern blacksmiths and modern craftsmen enough credit sometimes for the talent that we have. And that's not to say that I'm yanking or tooting my own horn, you know. I'm just saying, hey, there's a lot of guys now that are doing
Right.
amazing work.
Well, and I think we're so in our era, we're so used to products being so refined that we expect everything to kind of look that way to a degree, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, again, for me, the real big takeaway was, you know, you don't you don't have to be that hard on yourself. It's like as a musician, right? I don't, or you look at a lot of actors that won't watch their own shows, or whatever film they've created. A lot of them won't watch their own work.
Mm.
It's the same with the musician. The only time I listen to the songs my band has written and recorded is when I need to remember how to play it.
Oh, yeah.
And then outside of that, there's two albums I love because I wasn't on those albums. Everything that I've recorded since, I can't listen to because I'll hear everything I did that I wish I hadn't done.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
but- yeah, but now with that gate, right? My big thing is you know what? Maybe just relax a little bit. It's not that big a deal. And the other thing I really took away from that gate is those weren't up front and center. Those you had to go looking for those flaws, if you want to call them flaws, rough
Oh, yeah,
forgings.
yeah.
He hid them very well.
Mm.
So that was another thing. I was like, oh, because we're doing like a grate right now at Kurt's shop, and there's some things where it's like, I don't think we need to be that particular about that because that's going to be a backside piece. You're not looking at that. So
Right.
yeah, we want to do it as nice as we can and as well as we can, but that side doesn't have to be beautiful. What we need to worry about is the front side that we're looking at. You know?
Sure. Yeah.
that's where the stress of what we're trying to accomplish, that's where that really needs to be focused. What's happening on the backside, nobody's looking at that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it is. So
But
yeah,
you know,
that's a big thing.
it takes somebody that's been doing this stuff a while to realize where how a flaw can be hidden. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I've ever seen, well, I think I've seen some yelling work in the Washington D.C. area, I think.
I might be some there. There's definitely some in Philadelphia, a lot of Philadelphia, because I think that's where the
I
shop
think
was.
some famous blacksmith did stuff on the National Cathedral, if I'm not mistaken, in D.C.
Uh,
And I've
that
seen
might
some
have
stuff up
been
there.
what's his name? There's two guys that come to mind. Would either be Yellen or Cyril Kolnick, I think is the other person. That's actually the
Okay.
great we're working on now is one of his.
Huh.
But he, so it would probably, my guess would be Yellen first, but it could be Cyril Kolnick. And I think I'm saying his
Yeah.
name right, but I could be wrong. But Cyril Kolnick, I believe, is the other guy. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't quote me on this. But yeah, the whole it's an interesting thing. But it's one of those, like a lot of people think that's something I picked up from Brian. That was a trait I'd had, kind of be critiquing myself. That was a trait I had long before that. But when we're forging, when we do a hammer or something, that's what when I work somebody, help them make a hammer. One of the things I always tell them is like, this is your hammer. We can keep working it as much as you'd like until we get it where you want it,
Yeah.
or that is entirely up to you. But I was like, once you get done, I also tell them, if this is your first hammer, it's not going to be the greatest hammer. I mean, it's just not. I mean, how many times have you done it? Once? Come on. You got to do at least 10 before you even start getting a feel for it. So I always tell them, strive to make the next one better. So look at what you've done and figure out in that what you could have done better.
Yeah.
And generally it's just little things like making sure your lines are lined up or keeping the tool level. A lot of people don't realize, and I'm
Well,
terrible about this,
you know
keeping
this.
that tool level makes a huge difference.
Sure. Yeah. But so you were in the music industry or a musician, you played in a band for a long
Yeah.
time, right?
Yep. Still do. Still
And
do.
yeah. So
We just slowed down.
so tell me that you don't see a lot of the same uh
Oh yeah. Those
concepts
parallels are there.
between
Yeah.
mastering an instrument and learning, a particular skill in blacksmithing. It's like the first time you play a piece, it's going to be terrible. The
Oh
second
yeah.
time, it's going to be a little better, and the third time, and you may have a little fret buzz, when you're first starting to learn the chords and all, but you can still hear the music and you can still make out what the tune is. But the more you play it, the less you get the fret buzz, and the more you get to like, you know, improvise and riff a little bit. And that's the same thing with the forging. You learn these basics, and over time you just you stack skill on skill until you're making beautiful pieces just like you're making beautiful music. But the first time you ever learned to play a song all the way through on a guitar, I could probably ask you what that was and you probably still remember it.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
you know
Definitely
so
remember it.
that first hammer is the same way. I
Oh yeah.
the very first hammer I made using the Brazil method was with Lyle in that class, and it's still in my rack, and I still remember it, and I still use that hammer all the time. It's not perfect. It's not the prettiest hammer in my rack, but I'll never let that one go.
Yeah. I didn't finish my first one.
Oh,
When I
really?
took that hammer class. Never got finished. I put a handle on it just to say I have a handle on it, but it's not a finished handle. And it would be, I would guess you consider it a soft hammer, but I don't use it. It's sitting over there. But I kept it. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just kind of a lump. I think we got as far as punching it and then doing the knocking down the cheeks, but not cheeking it. No,
yeah,
I don't, there was no trough lines or anything. Somebody asked if I wanted to finish it, and I was like, no, I think I'm going to leave it as it is. I think,
sure.
it tells a story. I'll leave it like that. But yeah, that's one of the things people equate me or attribute me as the striking guy that make hammers. I'm the hammer making guy, and I'm really not. But I love to help people for that reason, right? To me, it might just be my own brain, but I feel like that's something that that person is always going to remember. Their
Yeah,
very
there's
first
something
hammer.
about it. I don't know what it is,
Yeah,
but it there's something, and I think I said this on a maybe it was with Jeff Daughterman. We were talking about hammer making or something, but there's something about making a hammer, and everybody that I know of that's in blacksmithing, whether they stay in this mode for a while, the tool making mode or not, but I don't know anybody that's interested in blacksmithing that hasn't gone through that phase where you make a hammer and then you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to make
yeah,
all the hammers. I've got to make hammer after hammer after hammer. There's something about it. And people, it's like you said, people don't forget that. I've
right.
had a few people come out to my shop and, you know, close friends and people, and we've made hammers, and several of them aren't blacksmiths at all, but they just love the experience.
Yeah, yeah. I enjoy helping people make them. Um, but I mean, one of the things, and I don't harp on this like Brian would. Brian's pretty, pretty like militant about this kind of stuff. But if you, as it's being forged, if you watch what's happening, and pay attention to what's happening, it will inform so much of your forging going forward because you're starting
Hmm.
to see how material moves and what shapes of dies, like be it a fuller or a ball fuller, things like that. You start to understand what those things can do and how they'll move material because it's such a big piece of material you're working with and it's so transformative, especially if you take it from a round to a rounding hammer. That's a massively transformative piece of forging.
Yeah, yeah, there's a
Um,
lot going on there.
so if you really pay attention to it, you start to really see things. And then there's the secret pieces of it, like, it doesn't really get talked about much, but it's just as important. When you're forging the eye, a lot of people don't really understand that, but there's a lot of geometry involved with that. And, things
Oh
like
yeah,
and
sure.
again, I don't go into this with people too much, but once you step away from the external forging and then start thinking about what's really happening on the inside,
Hmm.
one day I don't have a hammer here to show it, but one day Paul and I had forged a hammer and we started noticing the eye had gotten pinched, and we stepped back to really think about what did we do to cause that.
Hey, when did that happen?
Yeah, right. I mean, because we hadn't really seen that before, in other hammers, but something changed. We did something different. And then it occurred to me, oh, we didn't do this and this and this, so for people that are experiencing that, you need to redrift the hammers, essentially what you need
Yeah,
to do.
yeah.
Yeah. But
Hmm.
that's what happened. As you're fullering in the trough lines, that material's got to go somewhere. So it
Yeah,
starts coming in, and as you're doing this, it's pinching that little bit of material that got pushed in because you didn't have that drift as far as it needed to be to take care of that. So you're creating that. It's not an issue per se. I've seen a lot of hammers with that, but it's not as good as it could have been.
yeah,
But
yeah. Well,
it's still going to function as a hammer all day long.
sure, sure. That kind of goes along with, you've seen Mark and Andrew do their, how many blows does it take to make a hammer? What
102,
is it?
102
102,
hits.
and
Yeah.
to the uninformed, if you just say, "Hey, I'm going to watch these guys. They're going to make a hammer in 102 blows, and they're going to do it that way every time." Not
Yeah.
104, not 101. It's going to be 102. You know, that's a pretty. Uh, there's a lot of thoughtfulness to get to the point where for a fact it's going to take that many blows to make a
Yeah.
hammer, and you appreciate the fact that every single one of those hammer strikes is intentional, and if not done in the right way, you might get
Yep.
a pinched eye or an offset face, or something's not going to be
Yeah.
right,
Yeah. There's
and
no heat, beat, and repeat in that scenario.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
very methodical. And to some people, they might hear that and go, well, I don't want to be that careful. I want to just forge. I don't, but when you come down to it, you got to have precision when you're forging, whether you like it or not.
If you want
Um,
repeatability.
right, right. I had a
Yeah.
friend out last weekend. We made an axe together, and at the beginning, I was trying to calculate the billet size, and we got to the point where I was measuring with calipers, and then we cut that billet in half, and we had two exact size billets. I made two billets in case I screwed one of them up. But we were doing all this measuring and marking, and when I went to go mark where the eye was going to be, I was breaking out calipers and rulers and
Hmm.
stuff, and he he had never forged anything like that with me before, and he said, "Man, I had no idea how precise blacksmithing actually was." He said, "Hey, I
Yeah.
had no idea you were using tape measures and rulers and calipers." And I was like, "Man, this is just scratching the surface of what I've seen in blacksmithing when it comes to precision." I said, "Some
Yeah.
people get way more precise than I am, but it just goes back to it pays homage to the history, that there are people that have gone before us that have they've I guarantee you there are people before Mark and Andrew who figured out how to make a hammer
Oh
in
yeah.
90 blows or 105
Yeah.
blows or whatever, and have done that same thing, but um pays homage to that history.
Yeah, that's something Brian, I mean, he didn't do that, but Brian was very particular about that as well, counting your blows. He didn't have the sequence per se. He always preached, counting how many hits and repeating that so that you
Yeah.
know what you've done on one side, you do it on the other. The cool thing about what like Mark and Andrew and those guys had come up with is they really broke that whole process down. And the beautiful thing about it is that process, if you follow it, it will produce a hammer.
Hmm.
Now here's the thing about that, right? You don't have to follow that sequence exactly. You can come up with your
Right.
own. Just stick to it. Just stick to it. That's what I tell
Yeah.
people. And when it comes to precision stuff, right? That's the one thing I always tell people when they make a hammer is let's take our time. I don't care how many heats, for the most part, it takes to get that eye punched. But if you don't get that eye right, you might as well just pitch that billet and start over
Yeah.
because the amount of time
Yeah.
it's going to take to fix that is
Yeah.
going to far surpass the forging required to do the hammer. So, and that's another thing I think a lot of people that's probably the one thing I struggle with the most with new people forging a hammer with me is slowing down.
Mm.
Everybody thinks you got to move fast, 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 strike while the iron is hot kind of thing. I'm like, dude, that's a 3 pound billet. It's going to be hot for a minute.
Yeah.
Um,
You know that
so
have you ever
slow
have you ever
down.
noticed, yeah, have you ever watched I know it's a silly question to ask if you ever watched this, but when you watch uh someone who has been uh trained in the Brazil method, especially watching Brian back in the day, one thing that's just jumped out at me one of the first times I watched him forge was he was directing while, and I don't even remember who it was, but he was directing while someone else was striking. And I distinctly remember how how gently and slowly he was placing the tool and picking it up and then placing it back down, in between blows. And I remember going, man, that's kind of weird watching him just so slowly and methodically move this stuff around. There wasn't any jerking or moving real fast. It was all like real slow and chill, and just kind of like it was almost like cathartic to watch.
Yeah.
Just this super I don't know, the only word I can come up with is slow, but it's not that he was slow, it's that every movement of holding the billet and putting the tool right where it needed to be was not rushed.
Right. Yeah. Everything is very deliberate.
Yeah.
Everything is very deliberate. So like when he gently lays the piece down on the anvil, there's a reason for that. If you just flop it on the anvil, you're likely to mar it up if it's hot,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you just
Yeah.
drop a hot billet on there, it's likely to ding it up, and those dings will show up in the work later on down the road. And he's very particular about that kind of stuff. But it's the the overall like just deliberate nature of way they do things that really kind of made me stop and go, wow, okay, yeah. And that's when the heat, Pete, and repeat, whatever thing, it kind of entered my head and then left it. I was like, there's none of that here. There's everything is done for a
Yeah.
reason. Every blow, there's a reason. And I still struggle with that on some things where I don't do that. And I have to stop myself and say, hey, everything we're doing, there should be a reason for this. Don't just hit
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. I find
And
myself when I'm alone in the shop trying to make a hammer or a tool, sometimes I find myself kind of rushing through it, trying to finish the forge portion of it or the forging portion of it. And I have to kind of slow myself down. Um,
yeah. And
well,
I
we've been
find for
talking
me,
about,
that's when the most mistakes usually happen too, is when I
oh,
start
sure,
rushing after that.
100%, 100%. We've been talking about all these guys, these big names, Yellen and Brian Brazil, and um, you've got a hammer in your shop that's got a ton of history behind it. So you've got a little
Yeah.
giant 250 in there that
I don't
was,
know if he shows up. We'll see. I put myself, yeah, there we go. I put
yeah.
myself in
So
position to
for the
show him
people
off.
that are watching who don't know who owned that hammer before you, tell us about it.
So yeah, this hammer, I don't know its full origins, but I do know that at one point Clifton Ralph owned this hammer. And if you own the Clifton Ralph DVD set, this hammer does make an appearance. It is my understanding that this was not actually his favorite hammer, though. Obviously, because he sold it. He has got a 100-pound Murray. That was his favorite. This is a Murray, by the way,
Okay.
not a little giant.
Yeah.
So there are some differences. I don't go into it too much. It's a fair bit heavier than a little giant. It doesn't use Babbitt. I believe they're brass bushings,
Right.
and some other things. But yeah, this was one of Clifton's hammers for quite a long time, and he sold it to a gentleman, a farrier, um, who was, I guess, well known in the farrier circles, for forging hammers and things like that for farriers. And he had it for, I think, since about 94, 95, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
And then he retired. And Kurt Fehrenbach told me about this hammer. And it's kind of funny. I really didn't want to buy it right out of the gate. I was really hot and heavy for a self-contained hammer, and I really couldn't find one. And then Kurt told me about one that was up near Chicago. They have a Nazel 4B, and I was like, oh, I
Mm.
really want that's the hammer. And I spent months trying to get these guys to call me back. They would never call me back. So finally, I was like, okay, I have to make a decision here. I'm not going to chase this hammer for years and not have something because I know me enough to know that I can't hold on to this money that long.
Yeah.
I'll do something dumb. So, so I got a hold of God. What's his name? Is it Jim Johnson, John Johnson, the Anyang guy?
Oh, James
Anyways, he
Johnson.
was
Yeah.
James Johnson. Yeah. So I got a hold of him and was looking at a 165.
Yeah.
But the problem for me in my shop is I've only got 200 amp service here, and I have to run a phase converter, and my phase converter wasn't up to snuff to run that hammer. I would have
Yeah.
had to upgrade it. It was going to cost me about $5,000 to $6,000 to upgrade the phase converter, and I didn't have the budget for that. So that's where Clifton. I've named that hammer Clifton, by the way. So that's where Clifton came in. I checked to see if that guy was still willing to sell it, and he was. So me, Paul Kennedy, and a buddy named Dan Borowski, we drove down, and it's kind of funny.
DB.
I had, yeah. So we drove down to pick this hammer up. I was sick. I had this thing under my armpit that was just like a lymph node that had swollen or something, and I was
Mm.
almost useless. And those two guys got it. We loaded everything up. We got it back to the house. This is like 3 hours from my place. So it was an all day ordeal. We got back to the house. We
Oh, I'm
finally got it
sure.
off the trailer. And then it sat at the front of my shop for a couple of months. Paul and I moved it around a little bit. It shifted during that process once, and I think we both had our brown pants on that day, thankfully, because once, I think
You
this
don't
thing
want to pull
weighs
a Will
around,
Stelter.
yeah, no, no. Uh, I want to say this is around 6,500, 7,000 pounds. It's a
Yeah.
it's a beefy boy.
If it starts to go,
And
it goes.
right, yeah. So when it shifted, me and Paul were, you would be surprised at how fast this old fat guy can be. Uh, but yeah, we did it. We isolated a slab for this. It's about 4 feet deep. And it's a 4x6 slab that it sits on. And we poured that and then got this thing. Mark
Nice.
Krause was a huge help in getting the slab for this. I know a lot of guys have issues with Mark, but when it comes to, power hammers, there's very few people I trust as well
Mark
as
is
Mark.
he is an unbelievably uh good resource when it comes to power hammers
Yeah,
of all
he's a great
kinds.
dude. I have no problems with Mark. He's always been good to
I
me,
talk to him quite a
and he
bit
was a
actually.
huge help.
We kind of we kind of go back and forth with each other on Facebook
Yeah,
about politics and religion sometimes, but
yeah. I try to avoid all that, but
yeah,
yeah,
he's
uh,
actually I called him out not long ago. I might be telling our business, but I was like, Mark, you're really abrasive with me when we're talking. He's like, man, we're just sparring, we're just jabbing. And I was like, well, sometimes I can't tell. So I'm glad you told me that. Now I know that we're just jabbing. So I'm I'm okay with it. But
yeah.
yeah,
I had an
if
instance
you
like
got
that
power
once.
hammer issues, yeah, he's the guy.
Yeah, yeah, he's been
100%.
very helpful. And then I've also been very fortunate to have Kurt Fehrenbach, an hour away from me. I go out to his shop every Thursday night, usually. So if I need something, Kurt's really good about helping
What
out
a
too. And then,
man.
yeah, and then I've
What
got
a
Paul.
resource.
Everybody needs a Paul in their shop. Unfortunately, I can't keep him here all the time, but um, Paul might. What's great about Paul is he might not actually know the thing, but he's a lot like me. He's not afraid to tear it apart and figure it out. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the reasons we get along so well is we're not afraid to tear things up to figure them out. We don't ever, ego never really enters into our jazz sessions here in the forge. And when we come up with
Yeah.
I refer to them as I does. I have a lot of I does. Like, sometimes they come to fruition and become actual ideas. Sometimes they just remain I does. But Paul is always good about like, you know what? I don't know either. Let's try it, and
Yeah.
then we'll spitball crazy
I don't
ideas
know.
and
I've
do
hung
things.
around Paul with you guys. I don't know him super well, but what I do know about him is super, super nice guy. Just,
Yeah.
um, just really great to be around.
He is willing to help almost anybody to his own detriment sometimes. Yeah, and sometimes it's like, dude, you got to let them do the thing too.
Yeah.
You can't do all the things for all the people. There's times
So
where
for
I've been
those
in my
listening,
shop.
Paul is Death's Visage, right? On Instagram.
Yeah, yeah, on Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One
Yeah.
time or a
Great
couple
guy.
times, he complained about I live in a wooded area and my shop gets the gutters get packed with leaves all the time. One
Yeah.
time he kind of complained about it because the water just kind of dumps right off of the gutters now. And one day I heard stomping around up on this roof and I was like, what in the world? I went out and Paul had climbed up on the roof and started cleaning my gutters out. I'm like, dude, what are you doing?
He got tired of it. That's funny.
Yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
that's
and he's a
cool.
good
So
dude, but yeah,
yeah, he is, no
everybody needs a Paul
doubt.
in the shop.
Um, so is what that hammer's got a lot of history, obviously,
Oh
and
yeah.
we probably don't have time to go into the whole thing with Clifton Ralph and how many people that guy influenced. I mean, right off the top of my head, Nathan Robertson,
Okay. Yeah.
of Jack Pine Hammers. I believe he was super influenced by Clifton Ralph.
Yeah.
Brent Bailey, super influenced by Clifton Ralph. Clay Spencer, super influenced by Clifton Ralph. Kurt Fehrenbach,
Yep.
super influenced by Clifton Ralph. He's just like the legacy that guy left in the power hammer world is just unbelievable. And so he does have a really awesome DVD too. You were mentioning it a minute ago. It's like Clifton Ralph Power Hammer Techniques or something. It's a two or three
Yeah.
DVD set. And
Yeah.
let
There's
me tell you,
several.
if for those of you listening, if you've never seen that DVD set, you're gonna there are techniques and tooling and power hammer principles on that that aren't you'll not find anywhere else. You
Yep.
know, there's some crazy intuitive and ingenious tooling and techniques on that DVD set. It's well worth getting, and you'll get to see that hammer that's in Rob's shop in use on that DVD set. So anyway, it's a
Yeah.
plug
Yeah.
for the Clifton Ralph DVD set. I think they're still selling those somewhere.
Yep. You can get, uh, at least on Facebook, if you look up Lane Ralph, Lane Ralph, that's his
Okay,
son, and his son sells those for the family.
gotcha.
That's one way to get them. I think you can get them on eBay as well. Just make sure you're getting it from the family and not
Right,
somebody, bootlegging them.
bootlegging it or something.
Um,
Yeah,
because Clifton's wife is still alive. So every little bit helps anybody out. So, just I would say the one thing I know that there are people that know about Clifton, but I don't think enough people know about
I don't
Clifton.
think so either. Yeah, especially
I really
nowadays.
think if you really go back to when he kind of popped up on the scene and you know he changed everything, like
Hmm.
everything. I mean, not just power hammers. There's hand forging techniques that he brought, and showed people that people just weren't doing because
Oh yeah,
the
sure.
resources weren't really there. He really changed a lot of things. And one of my big takeaways from it was he had an industrial background. So I watch a lot of industrial forging videos now.
Hmm.
And if you really watch them, there's a lot of stuff you can take away from those. Um, Very
Oh
interesting
sure.
techniques being used. Yeah, sure, you're not going to take, a 12-inch round piece of steel and upset it like a 3,500 pound drop hammer is going to.
Yeah,
But if you shrink that down,
yeah. The
it's the
principles are all the
same thing.
same. Yeah, the
Yeah, it's
principles
the
are all the
same
same.
thing. I just watched a video where they were upsetting a bar. It had to have been 12 inches round and it looked like about 3 feet tall. It was tapered on the end. And the reason they tapered on the end is they're upsetting it. It tends to stay centralized. It's just like putting a taper on your hand tool, right? It's
Okay,
centralizing
yeah.
that force down into the piece. And I was like, that is really cool to see. And I've
It's
heard
pretty
that
smart.
before, but I'd
Huh.
never seen it in an industrial setting like that. And I watched these guys do it, and I was like, that is really cool to see
Man,
those same techniques.
oh yeah, I've learned some stuff watching these guys over in India and Pakistan. You know, they got these little air hammers and they're running them nonstop,
Hmm.
making shovels or axes or something. You watch those guys that are running those hammers all day long, and it'll put you in your place real quick with how
Oh
efficient
yeah,
you think you are at a hammer, you know.
yeah,
Um, there's always something to learn from those things. So anyway,
yeah.
would you say that's what's your favorite tool in the shop? That's what I was getting at. So
Oh man,
that
is
tool's
it
got a
is it
lot of history,
Clifton?
but is it your favorite?
That's like asking who your favorite child is, I think. Um, I've got two tire hammers that I love. I use one of my tire hammers with the flat dies almost anytime I come out here. I
Yeah,
don't use Clifton all the time. It's a lot of hammer for, anything half inch and under. It doesn't belong under a 250 pound power hammer, in my opinion.
right.
It just, plus I like to do a lot of hand forging. But to be quite honest, that guy, I think right now is my favorite tool.
Yeah,
I use
it's
it.
hard not to say the induction machine if you've got one, simply because
I've
I
got,
think
yeah,
I think it allows you to forge more than ever
oh yeah.
before. At least it did for me when I put induction in my shop. The amount of time I was able to get at the anvil increased significantly because I wasn't waiting on heat.
Yep. My Apollo forge, which I love, by the way, it's a gas forge, and I don't
Yeah,
really care for gas forges, but that Apollo forge is awesome. But it
yeah,
takes 25 minutes to get to heat to actually be at a
Sure.
usable heat. My coal forges, I can get them up to heat pretty quick, but it's still work that I got to do. You got to maintain a fire. I got
Yeah.
to, that's the thing. And I love my coal forges. I prefer coal forging over probably any other process. But let me tell you what, I can come out here and forge something under this induction forge within seconds. And to me, that is invaluable. And I'm
Yeah.
sure for you as well, I work, I have a real job. I don't really sell anything, but I can come out here. The other day I came out here and forged a heart, and it's 20 minutes, and the most inefficient part about it was I was too lazy to take the big coil off, but I made it work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You need to get the quick changes.
I have them. I just need to actually install them. I'm a
Come
bit
on,
lazy,
man.
but
Yeah.
I will
Those are
tell you.
awesome.
I mean, for the money, I will say this has probably been one of the best investments for my shop I've ever made. I bought a press from Coal Iron, and I love those guys. I rarely use that press.
Huh.
Rarely use it. There are some things that I think the press is fantastic for. I don't do much
Yeah.
of that. Um,
Yeah.
my power, the 250, if I need to actually move material, this 250 is going to get it done way quicker than that press, anyways.
Oh, sure.
Um,
I bet.
oh, I mean, yeah, people debate that, and I'm like, well, yeah, come over here and see what this will do at a 2 inch bar and how long it will do it to that 2 inch bar. That's the other
Oh,
key
yeah. It'll
thing,
keep it hot.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the induction forge, man, I
Mm.
got it, I brought it home, and I was worried I had made a mistake because I was almost going to buy their digital press controller instead. I was kind of like,
Yeah.
which one will I use? And then the more I was over there, the more I thought, I think the induction forge I will use more. And I'll tell you what, I will have a gas forge going. I might have a coal forge going, and I will still use this thing.
Oh, yeah.
I will
Yeah.
always find a reason to use it.
Yeah.
I love this part. So Ed was here, earlier in 2024, just before Quad State, we were doing some stuff, and then he was like, "Hey, do you think that thing will heat up titanium?" I was like, "Oh yeah." He was like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he brought out this piece of titanium and came out, and he just was tickled pink. And he must have sat out here forging that titanium for about an hour, just playing with it. And
Just
he every
playing
time
around.
he'd like that, every time he'd put that piece in the like he would giggle. He loved it. He loved it.
They
I
are
wish I could
fun
afford
too.
to buy him
They're
one.
so
Yeah,
fun. I mean,
yeah,
they're just fun. But yeah, you're right. That it is probably, I think it's my favorite tool. Probably, but and my if that and the tire hammer are the two most used things in my shop, really. And
yeah.
the
Same.
bandsaw is a close third, but the
Don't use
tire
my
hammer
bandsaw
and the
much.
induction, man, I use mine all the time. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I
if
have it. I use it to break down big stuff, but like I don't have I have a small one on a swag table, with a swag off road tables with a
yeah,
quarter
yeah,
band
those are
on it.
good.
It's handy. I like having it, but I don't use it that much. And I don't like it's not that I don't like it, but I don't like to do like the crosses and stuff. I just don't do those.
Yeah.
Um so I just for me it's more like I need to cut this little thing off real quick, and that's what I use it for. And the thing is I'm like I have this unreasonable fear of zip wheels or cut off disc on an angle grinder. You know, I like my hands, and I've seen so
Sure.
many injuries with those, into people's hands, and I'll use them, but I don't like it. So if I can use the bandsaw for that, that's what I'll do. But I've got a big, it's a Johnson bandsaw that'll cut up to like 8 inches or something.
Holy cow.
And when we need to break stuff down, we'll use that and break it down. But I prefer.
Hmm.
I'm a lot like Brian in that regards. Like if I can hot cut it, I would prefer to hot cut it. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
but yeah, I have to give it up to the induction forge. To be honest, I think right now it's my favorite tool in the shop. I mean it.
You get no argument from me.
Yeah, I mean when I see people, like Roy Adams he makes fun of them because of the beeping and how clinical they are, and he's
Yeah.
got this romantic view of doing it, a certain way. And I'm like, but dude, you've got an electric blower hooked up to your forge. Come on.
And he's got a CNC table in the shop.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, man.
Right.
But I think it's a lot like I don't know that Ed ever naysayed one, but I don't know that he'd never used one. I don't think so.
Oh,
The
really?
first time
Huh.
he actually used it, he was like, "This is cool," you
Look,
know.
I don't know
And
I haven't seen
yeah,
anybody that has not had that reaction. Their first
yeah,
time use is always that way. I've never seen anybody come up to use one and they're like, it's all right. Everybody's like, whoa, I got to get one. And you know what? I bet you a week has not gone by in the last 3 or 4 years where I haven't gotten messages from people saying, how do I get one? Where do I get one?
yeah,
And I think we're still at the very beginning. There are way more people who don't have them in this community than do still.
oh yeah,
But I think we're at the very beginning of people. People, more and more people are going to get them over time.
oh yeah.
And like you
I
said,
agree.
it's not gonna do away with coal and gas. I mean, I used gas all weekend, forging that axe out, but
Yeah,
we heat treated it with induction. You know,
yeah. I and that's the thing, right? Like it's not going to do everything, or at least it won't do everything well. It
right?
does certain things very well.
Yeah,
Um, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, what other tool in your shop can you put a piece of 1 inch round into a coil, step on a little switch, and that thing is blistering hot within 45 seconds?
right,
None,
right,
none. And how many of them can give you a heat? An
hmm
inch and a half or an inch or whatever your coil width might be.
right.
How many can isolate a heat to that degree? You're not doing it in a gas forge. There ain't
Sure,
no way.
yeah.
You know,
I think it's
gas
replaced a
forges are great for
torch for a lot
production
of
runs.
people.
Yeah, and it's
You
way
know,
cheaper than a torch. I don't know. Well, at least around here, settling around here is not cheap.
oh
You
yeah,
know,
it's cheaper. It's cheaper than, I mean, once you pay for the machine, it's cheaper than the torch, and you don't have to
yeah.
worry about the bottle running out or, man, look,
I,
I had a torch. I don't have a torch in my shop, but I had one for a little
really.
while, and twice I left the valve open, and
Oh, that is brutal.
yeah,
You got
I don't know what those
balloons.
balloons were. Yeah, I think if you do hand signals or like
Yep, there
here
you
we go,
go. Yeah,
here
you
we
got
go. Let me
fireworks
go.
now.
All right.
Oh,
Oh.
wow, that's pretty cool. But yeah, no, the induction forge. I mean, I'll tell you. And then Cole was putting out the 25K kilowatt ones.
hmm
Um, those are pretty sweet too. And shameful plug. I don't get anything from those dudes other than friendship. These are great machines. In the
Oh
heat of
yeah,
summer,
they're awesome.
I couldn't get this chiller. It, it would never go over 75 degrees.
Yeah,
When I
yeah, you
walked
can't
out, it
outwork it.
might be, yeah, it might have been 80 degrees when I walked out or walked into the shop. But once I started using it, 75 degrees, it would hold
Yep, yep. I
all day
I
long. And
haven't
I'm
I
putting
haven't been
big
able to
stuff in it.
outwork mine at all. You know.
Yeah. The only problems I've ever had, and this is just, because I'm trying stupid, inch and a half bar in this thing with a 2 inch coil, it can tax it. You got to kind of baby it in there. That's a bit
Yeah,
much for
you
a
got to
15
feed
kilowatt
it from the
machine.
edge and work it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I spoke to
But
a guy
I
today.
mean,
It was
it will do
funny.
it. Yeah.
There was a guy that messaged me today. He was having trouble with I think it was inch and a half square pipe, like hollow
Mm,
square tubing, and he was using a round coil, and like 1 inch round was heating fine in the coil, but the inch and a half square was not. And I think it was just the difference
easy.
in the size of the
Corners.
coil. But he said, yeah, he said, I'm able to feed the pipe in from the outside and get it hot just fine, but I can't stick the pipe in and like heat the middle of the bar. It's too much resistance. So
Yeah.
I gave him some suggestions on coil design that I think might help. Yeah, I've seen Terry Cash made a square coil
Of
for
course he
square
did.
bar. Yeah, it's pretty cool looking. Well, man, we're
Yeah.
hitting almost an hour and 15 minutes. I'm about to have to
Oh
go. I
wow.
hate to cut short.
So before you go, I want a little show and tell real quick.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so this is my daily driver hammer. It's a 3.5 pound hammer. Ed Brazil and I forged together during COVID. This is
Yeah,
the one I
yeah.
use every day.
So is that your
So
favorite
shout out
hammer,
to
you think?
Ed. Oh, definitely. I've used a couple of others, and they just don't. They're fine. They're great looking hammers. They
Yeah.
just don't feel the same. But this is really what I wanted to show you. This is a wooden mallet, but it's got cast iron body, and I got this on
What?
eBay for like $15. So instead of
No
that
way.
stick that you're using, you can get one of these, and it's got some heft to it. I'm going to guess that's at least 3 pounds.
That's
And
pretty cool.
it's got wood faces. You can even get rawhide inserts for these as well. I've seen.
Okay, I've
I haven't
seen
figured
some of
out how
those
to change
rawhide
it yet.
hammers. Yeah.
Yeah, so this currently has wooden inserts, but I believe you can get the rawhide ones. You can probably just make them too.
Man,
But
that's
yeah,
a
I
heck
got
of a
this thing
deal for
on.
15 bucks.
Yeah, I got it on eBay for like $15, and love this thing. So
Yeah, what I'm
I was
using
watching
lately
you
is
wipe
just a
those things the other day.
piece of hickory.
Yeah, yeah, I saw
Yeah,
that.
I'm using a handle blank basically.
Yeah, and that reminds me. I noticed a problem with your anvil stand, the tool rack on your stand. You seem to be missing a rounding hammer on that stand. So Paul and I, we're going to have to rectify that for you. The only question would be is what size rounding hammer would you want?
Man,
From
I
us two
think
chuckleheads.
I use a 3 most often. Like the
Yeah,
hammer I use more than any other is like 2 pounds 14, you know,
yeah. Okay,
something like that.
we'll keep that. So we won't forward you in 6 pounder.
I mean, I wouldn't turn down a 6 pounder, but I've got a 4.5 pounder that I use for driving drifts, and that's about all I ever use it for. Now, I
Yeah.
did get a big, I think I got a big one I got a big one from Pinkston last
Oh
year,
yeah.
and
Nice.
I think it's a 5 pound,
Yeah. I
and
got
it's an
Ed
awesome
knife
hammer. You know, I use it every
last
once in a while.
March. This is a 5.5 pounder that Ed and I forged last March in Oklahoma. Um, this is my drift driving hammer for the most part, but I use it every once in a while when I've got to break down bigger stock,
Yeah,
like three quarter inch and higher. If I really need to take it down, I go to that
yeah.
first, and then I'll switch when I break it down.
Well, when I grow up, I'll probably be able to use a heavy hammer, but I'm just not there yet.
Yeah, I don't want to use it all the time, but I'll tell you what, for driving a drift, I don't if I'm sure you saw it when Andrew and I did the hammer demo at
Yeah.
Cole Ironworks. That he's got an 8 pound hammer he uses for driving drifts. It's got the big dimple in it.
Oh yeah.
After
Yeah,
I
I
saw
remember him
that, I was
showing
like,
that. Yeah.
I want one of those now because really, when you're driving a drift, you really want to get that thing down there as quick as you can because that preserves your heat.
Was
If
that a
you're
soft
dinking
hammer?
around on it, yeah, yeah, it's a
Okay.
4140 unquenched.
Yeah. I have one
But yeah,
soft
that's
hammer. I have one soft hammer in my rack, and it was made by John Norwood,
oh
Old
nice,
Hickory Forge, and it was
yeah,
he was making a bunch of them for Blade Show, you know, and he forged out a bunch of hammers and didn't realize that they were all mild steel until he went to heat treat them.
oh
Like
no,
he had bought a bunch of 2 inch round from a steel company, and they told him it was 1045, and
oh
he didn't
man,
find out until he had made like 100 hammers, you know,
oh, I'd be
and then he
furious.
yeah, he went back to the steel company and they were like, yep, that was a mistake. And so anyway, he had done all that work before Blade and then didn't have hammers. So he put them out on the
Yeah,
market. He was like, hey, well, I've got these hammers. They're basically soft hammers, you know, and so I got
yeah,
one from him
nice,
and I've used it for that quite a bit.
right on. Yeah, we'll see what we got around here. We got stuff. Keep us busy. Oh, and we'll be heading down to John Perriloux's in March, March 6th, I think. There's the banging on the bayou thing going on down that way,
Oh
I think
yeah,
over in
yeah.
Lafayette.
I
So
will be there. Um, I believe I will be there. I've got a thing to do with my daughter sometime in March. I got to see when that is. If it's not on the same weekend, I'll be there for sure.
okay, cool. Yeah, we're gonna try and kidnap Andrew Larson on our way down. And then I think Mark is planning. Mark said he would be there at the banging on the bayou thing.
Oh, cool.
We're really looking to spend most of our time at John's, but I'd like to at least go do a day over at that
Yeah.
event, check it out.
Man, John's got a really cool class this weekend. Mariko
I saw that.
Mamasi is going to be there
Yeah.
the 7th and the 8th this weekend doing a Damascus class. And man, I
Okay.
mean, I was just dying to go, but the next weekend, the 14th, I'm going to Illinois to teach a demo over there to the Midwest guys. So
Oh yeah.
I can't really
Where
be gone two
whereabouts?
weekends in a row. It is south below it, Illinois. That's
Okay.
where I'm going. South
I don't
below.
know where that's at, but I'll look.
I think it's the Midwest Blacksmith Association that I'm going to
Okay.
do a
I
demo
think I think
for.
the IBA does some stuff with them, so I'll look. Paul and I might
Okay.
come pay a visit.
Yeah, I don't know how far that is from you guys, but it's a little ways north of Chicago. It's
Yeah, it
called
should be about 3 4 hours.
South Below It, Beloit.
Hmm. Okay.
So we're going to be
Yeah, I don't.
doing kind of the normal
3 hours or
stuff I
so.
do, and I'm going to be doing induction forge casting demo with a young guy there. We're going to take some of my 3D printed anvils and make some little
Nice.
bronze cast anvils as part of the
That'd be
demo.
cool.
So yeah,
Yeah,
looking
that'd be
forward to
cool.
that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Well, where can
But
people
yeah,
find you,
that's
Rob?
um Instagram when I can get back into it. I managed to lock myself out somehow, but it's Rob Huff 317 on Instagram. Um, Facebook, I'm just Rob Huff, Hough. Either one of those. You can find me on the Indiana Blacksmith Association website. I am the membership secretary, so
Okay,
you
cool.
can reach out to me via that way as well. So my email is on there and phone number. You can text me or whatever.
And you've been
I
doing
don't
some
mind.
streaming lately too, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've been streaming on YouTube as Sharpbend Forge, Twitch under the same name, and then just my
Oh, okay. You're doing
Facebook,
Twitch
YouTube.
too?
Yeah,
How is it working
yeah.
out on
It's
Twitch?
I get people watch, but I don't understand the Twitch is more user interaction based than anything
Yeah.
else. I really think, and I don't. I mean, people watch, but I don't. I don't interact with the crowd per se as much on Twitch, other than reading comments and then kind of going back and forth. And the comments thing, I'm actually trying to kind of tamp down a little bit because I found that it takes me like 10 times as long to do something
Oh, I'm sure.
because
Yeah.
I get to running my mouth on stream and I'm not working and I'm like I just need to I'll plan breaks,
Yeah.
and then have timed breaks to deal with that so I can actually get something done. So
That's
we'll see how
cool.
that goes.
Hmm.
I should be doing that later tonight. After I eat, I'm gonna come out and we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to go make some food myself. Well, look, man, we talked for almost an hour and 20 something minutes. I
Yeah, my
appreciate you.
wife just texted me.
Yeah, mine did too a little while ago. She said, make sure you take the dog out before it gets dark. And that I think I
Whoops.
missed the deadline. But anyway, thanks a bunch for taking the time to chat. I'm glad we got to do it. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, maybe we can get together sometime soon in Illinois or at least in March. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, yeah, that's
All right.
awesome. Thanks for having me. Good
Yeah,
times.
anytime. We'll do it again.
All
See ya.
righty, take it easy.